VIU Online presents Peer Review, 25 Practical Tips for Giving and Receiving Feedback from Your Peers. This lecture is presented by Dr. Laura Hills, Professor of English at Virginia International University. You will be participating in peer review in this course. In this program, we will share 25 tips that will help you get the most from this experience. Tip number 1, post your best draft. Remember when you are posting material for review that other people will be reading it, engaging with what you have written, and giving you thoughtful feedback. They deserve your best effort. If you are not ready to post, don't do so. Polish your work and then post it. Don't waste people's time by giving less than your best effort. Tip number 2, alert your readers about any concerns you have before they read. It's perfectly acceptable in peer review for you to ask for specific feedback. Maybe there is a section you're particularly concerned about, or maybe you have an idea about removing or adding material. Why not tell your reader that these are your thoughts and ask them for their sincere feedback about those ideas? Tip 3, be grateful for your readers' time and attention. You will be receiving peer review and you will also be a peer reviewer. So you will learn firsthand that it is work to give good peer review to a classmate. Even if you don't agree with what the person has said, be grateful that this individual has spent time reading what you have written and giving you thoughtful feedback. Tip number 4, don't become defensive. We're very proud often of what we have written, and it is troubling to hear anything other than high praise for our writing. But it's important for you to grow as a writer, and to do so, you must open yourself to the feedback you receive. If you assume a defensive posture, you won't be open to new ideas. Put aside your ego and listen carefully to what your classmates are telling you. Try to be as objective as you possibly can. Pretend that you are not the person who wrote this text, and see if you can find points of agreement. Tip number 5, don't feel obligated to take all of your peer reviewers' advice. Just because somebody has an opinion about your writing doesn't mean that they are right or that you are wrong. You can choose, after you've weighed everything out carefully, whether or not to follow the advice of your reviewer. Don't feel that you must do what they tell you to make them happy. This is not what it's about. Making your peer reviewer feel happy about what they have done is not the point. The point is for you to improve your writing. Use that as the measurement. See if that advice will help you do that. And if it does not contribute to making your writing better, then maybe you need to look at another option. Tip number 6, read the writer's paper carefully. When you are in the position of reviewing a classmate's work, you may find that there is some writing that you don't enjoy, and you may be tempted to skim or skip sections. But the way to give the best feedback to your peer is to read the paper as it has been written, even if you dislike it. So, no matter what, you owe your classmate a careful reading. Tip number 7 is to be positive. The way to have other people listen to your ideas is to couch them in the most positive ways that you can. You're here to encourage, even if you think your classmate has done a terrible job with the assignment. Your job as a peer reviewer is to give a good ideas, but also to encourage. So even when making suggestions, do so in the most positive way that you can. Tip number 8 is to be honest. It won't help anybody grow as a writer if you tell that person that everything is great and you loved what they wrote when you didn't. If something is not to your liking, you owe it to your classmate to be honest about that. Be positive, be helpful, but don't lie and say something is good when it isn't. Or don't lie and say it's good because you don't want to be bothered with giving the kind of thoughtful criticism that was required of you as a peer reviewer. Tip number 9 is to be specific. To say something like, this section was confusing, is only marginally helpful. If you can pinpoint exactly where the confusion is or what you're confused about, that will help your writer do much better in taking your criticism. So avoid things like, this part was strong, this part was confusing. Be very specific. Why was it strong? What was it that made it robust and strong? Was it the examples? Was it the story that was shared? What made it confusing? Where exactly is the confusion? Be very specific. Tip number 10, don't overwhelm. Focus on 1 or 2 areas for improvement. You may read a classmate's paper and be tempted to make a list of 22 things that you think would improve it. That's overwhelming. And nobody can really absorb all of that in one sitting. So, as a peer reviewer, focus on just 1 or 2 areas where you think the biggest payoff will be. If the writer changed just those 1 or 2 things, that would strengthen the paper the most. Tip number 11, reinforce positive change. If you give some criticism to a classmate and then later see they have revised the work or written another piece that incorporates those changes, say so. Say that you see that they're doing much better. Reinforce that change and tell them that yes, now they're getting the hang of what you were talking about. That's very encouraging. Tip number 12, don't assume, ask. You may read a paper and assume that the writer means something, but it really isn't clear. If something isn't clear, don't assume you know what the meaning was intended to be. Ask the writer, what did you mean to say here exactly? That will help him or her see that what he's written is not clear and exactly what needs to be done to change that. Tip number 13. Identify what can be cut and be very specific. You might say, you gave 4 examples, but 2 would have been sufficient, or this one was particularly repetitive. It does nothing that the first example didn't do. Give very good feedback about what can be eliminated to strengthen the work. And likewise, tip number 14 is identify what's missing. If the student who wrote the paper went A, B, C, F, G, H, you've got to say, wait a minute, where's D? You made a leap in your argument and there's a missing piece. It would be stronger if you gave us this missing piece and explained how you took it from C to F. So show them where in their train of argumentation it could be strengthened. Also, you might say what's missing is a good example. You make a claim in your paper, you might say, but you're missing an example. Or you're missing a credible, reliable, and trustworthy source. Where did you get this information? Where did you get this statistic? Well, that's what's missing. We don't know. Is this your opinion, or can you back it up? Tip number 15. Focus on the larger issues such as organization, not on grammar and spelling. As a peer reviewer, you're not there to be a copy editor. Yes, you may see spelling and grammatical errors, but your role is largely to help your classmate think in the larger sense about the paper. Is it organized well? Would it do better if it was organized a different way? Is it better if it had a story at the beginning? Is the conclusion weak? Those are larger issues, not you misspelled a word on page 3. That's only marginally helpful. Your role is to help in the larger sense of what would make the writing better. Tip number 16. Read the whole draft before commenting. In fact, you may want to read it twice. The first read, you may be distracted by errors in spelling and grammar or missing parts, but by reading it a second time, you get a sense of the whole much better. Certainly don't read halfway through and say, this is just terrible, and let me tell you why. Read the whole draft before you offer your review. Tip number 17. Focus on the written work. Don't engage in a discussion of the topic. This is really tough to do if you get excited or interested in the topic. But your role as a peer reviewer is to help your classmate become a better writer. So focus on that. Even though you may disagree or agree with the argument or have something to add to the discussion about the topic, that is not your role as a peer reviewer. Focus on the organization of the work, what's strong, where it gets confusing or muddied, where it could use more research or a quote, where it could use a story to give an example of how something might work, a case study. Don't get caught up in a discussion on the topic. Number 18, respond as a reader, not as a writer. Don't focus on what you'd have done. That's not relevant because the student you are giving your feedback to is not you. So your role is not to say, well, if I had written this, I would have done it this way, but rather to talk about your experience as a reader. Tip number 19, resist the temptation to edit. Don't give the exact words to your classmate. Don't suggest, here's a new paragraph you could insert here, or a new sentence. Give the kind of feedback that would lead that student to writing a better paragraph or a better sentence, but don't do it for him. Tip 20, model clear, concise writing in your peer review. In this course, your review will be given to your classmate in written form. So make sure that it is an example of good writing and that it is easy to understand. Model it by what you write in your review. Tip 21, describe. Don't convey frustration or disappointment. Rather than saying it was like a root canal to read your paper, or I tore my hair out, this was so awful, be very specific and say, I was following you until the second paragraph, the first sentence, and here I really didn't know what you meant. That is going to be easier for your classmate to accept than if you tell him or her that you're frustrated and disappointed in what has been put before you to review. Tip 22, be prompt. Follow the schedule for this class for when you are both to post something for peer review and when you are supposed to offer it. This is a very fast-moving course and you need to stay on track. So be very mindful that your feedback won't be useful if it's not timely. Tip 23, begin and end with positives. This is sometimes referred to as a PNP sandwich, a positive, negative, positive. Imagine the two pieces of bread are the positives and the filling of the sandwich is the negative. So you start with something positive that you can say about the writing. You offer your negative remark as positively as possible, and then you end with another positive. This is a formula that makes people accepting of criticism. Tip 24, don't use sarcasm. It's not a good way to offer criticism to your classmates, and it may be misunderstood and be taken for serious. So avoid sarcastic remarks like, "This is the greatest paper I've ever read," or "You must have really killed yourself on this," to make a point about something that you're not saying directly. Don't be sarcastic. And finally, tip number 25, respect the author's ownership of the text. You may find it frustrating as a peer reviewer to offer your great ideas when you know they would improve the writing and you don't see the author following your advice. You have to let it go. All you can do is offer your best ideas. It's up to the author to decide whether or not to take them. So don't feel slighted if the author goes another way. Here's a quote from Winston Churchill I'd like to share. "Criticism may not be agreeable, but it is necessary. It fulfills the same function as pain in the human body. It calls attention to an unhealthy state of things." Remember that your role in both accepting peer review and giving it is intended to take the body, in other words, the writing, and make it better, healthier. And it is necessary for your writing to improve. What we predict in your experience in peer review is you will benefit from your classmates' remarks on your own writing. But the biggest surprise for many students is that the process of critically reading another student's paper and offering criticism, careful criticism, is a great way to improve their own writing. You will learn to be a better consumer of texts by doing close readings of them and thinking about how they're structured, and that inevitably will inform your own practice as a writer. This is the end of this program. Peer Review, 25 Practical Tips for Giving and Receiving Feedback from Your Peers.